So today, we're jumping into one of the most dramatic and honestly tragic events in modern European history. We're talking about the collapse of Yugoslavia. How could a nation that seems so unified, so multi-ethnic, just completely unravel into a decade of horrific conflict? It's a story with scars that, believe me, are still very real today.
From the ashes of just one state, believe it or not, 7 new countries would eventually pop up on the map. You've got Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and yet the partially recognized state of Kosovo. All from one.
And what's really wild is how fast this all happened. I mean, think about it. In 1991, you have one single unified country. Fast forward to 2008, and poof, it's just gone, replaced by 7 different states. That's a complete redrawing of the map in less than 20 years. Just incredible.
So the big question is, how on earth did this happen? Well, to get our heads around it, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at the Yugoslavian idea itself. Then, the spark of nationalism that set everything off. We'll dive into the brutal war for Bosnia, cover the final conflicts, and wrap up with the legacy that's still being felt today.
All right, let's get into it. The Yugoslavian idea. To understand the collapse, you've really got to start with the creation. We're going back to right after World War I. The old empires, like the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire, had just crumbled, and out of those ashes, a brand new state was forged for the South Slavic peoples. The name they chose, Yugoslavia, actually just means land of the South Slavs. And really, this new kingdom was a huge experiment right from the get-go. I mean, you're smashing together all these incredibly diverse groups, different ethnicities, languages, religions. You have Orthodox Serbs, Catholic Croats, Muslim Bosniaks, you name it, all crammed under one flag. It's like you could already see the fault lines that would cause so much trouble down the road.
Okay, so then after World War II, this incredibly powerful and, charismatic figure steps onto the scene, Marshal Josip Broz Tito. He's the guy who pulls Yugoslavia back together, but this time under a communist regime. And for 35 years, his iron-fisted rule, along with this really potent slogan of brotherhood and unity, managed to keep a lid on all those simmering nationalist feelings. He basically held the whole fragile thing together by sheer force of will. And Yugoslavia's place in the world? It was unique, to say the least. Tito actually broke away from Stalin and the Soviet Union, which was a huge deal back then. He went on to co-found the non-aligned movement. They called it the Third Way. Basically, it let Yugoslavia carve out its own path during the Cold War, playing both sides, balancing between the East and the West. They even got economic aid from the American Marshall Plan. Just shows you how different they were.
But here's the thing. All that stability, it was incredibly fragile because it was pretty much all built around one guy. And now we get to the turning point, the real beginning of the end.
So in 1980, Tito dies, and his death leaves this massive power vacuum. See, all the government stuff he built, it all revolved around him. There was no real plan for who would come next. He was, for all intents and purposes, irreplaceable. It was like he was the cork in a bottle of champagne that had been shaken for decades. The second he was gone, all those old ethnic and religious tensions just exploded.
And the whole thing really started to fall apart in 1991. First up was Slovenia. Now, Slovenia was mostly ethnically Slovenian, pretty uniform. They declared independence, fought a quick 10-day war, and that was that. Easy enough. But Croatia? Whoa, that was a completely different beast. Croatia had a huge Serb minority living there for generations. So when its nationalist leader, Franjo Tudjman, pushed for independence, Serbia's new strongman, the infamous Slobodan Milosevic, unleashed a brutal military response. He played on Serb fears, and it kicked off a horrific, years-long war.
As awful as the war in Croatia was, what came next in Bosnia and Herzegovina? Well, it would become the absolute deadliest and most tragic chapter of this entire collapse.
So why Bosnia? Why was it the ultimate flashpoint? It's simple, really. It was the most ethnically mixed of all the republics. There was no single majority group. It was this incredible mosaic of Bosniak Muslims, Orthodox Serbs, and Catholic Croats who'd been living side by side for centuries. This made it a powder keg. When that toxic brand of nationalism swept through, Bosnia's diversity turned it into the perfect target for its neighbors to try and carve up for themselves. And the slide into total chaos was just terrifyingly fast. Bosnia holds a referendum for independence. Most of the Bosnian Serbs boycott it. Right after that, Serbia's military rolls in. And just like that, a brutal three-sided war explodes between Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats. The war became infamous for these absolutely horrific tactics. Things like widespread ethnic cleansing, which is a horrifyingly sterile term for forcibly removing people through terror and murder. And of course, the brutal, years-long siege of Sarajevo.
But the single most atrocious act of the entire war, the moment that just shocked the world, was the Srebrenica massacre. In July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces rounded up and systematically executed over 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys. Let's be clear about what this was: a state-organized act of genocide, happening right in the middle of Europe, decades after the world said never again.
It was that kind of brutality, especially Srebrenica, that finally forced a very hesitant international community to do something. So in 1995, NATO finally launched a major air campaign against the Bosnian Serb forces. That military pressure was what it took to get everyone to the negotiating table in Dayton, Ohio, and that's where they signed the Dayton Accords, which at long last ended the war in Bosnia.
Okay, so the war in Bosnia was over, but that didn't mean the whole region was at peace, not by a long shot. Those nationalist fires that Milosevic had stoked, they were still burning, and the conflict was about to flare up again, this time in the Serbian province of Kosovo.
So here's the deal with Kosovo. Its population was overwhelmingly ethnic Albanian and mostly Muslim. When Milosevic's Serbian forces started a brutal crackdown there, a resistance movement wasn't far behind. That movement became the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA, and they started fighting a guerrilla war for total independence from Serbia.
This time, it seems the international community had learned from how slow they were to act in Bosnia. The response was much faster. In 1999, NATO launched a 78-day bombing campaign, not just in Kosovo, but against Serbia itself. That did the trick. It forced Milosevic to pull his troops out, and Kosovo was put under UN administration. And that, right there, was pretty much the end of the last major war of Yugoslavia's collapse.
So the fighting was mostly done, but the old map of Yugoslavia still had a few more changes to go. Let's take a look at the final, more peaceful separations and really count the devastating cost of it all. And thankfully, these last few steps happened without any more bloodshed. The name Yugoslavia officially disappeared in 2003. A few years later, in 2006, Montenegro held a vote and became its own independent country. And then in 2008, Kosovo declared its independence too. Though it's worth noting, its status is still disputed by Serbia and a bunch of other countries even now.
When you look back, the legacy of these wars is just staggering. The human cost is almost impossible to comprehend. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions forced to flee their homes becoming refugees. The wars carved these deep, bitter ethnic divisions that, honestly, haven't healed. You have entire societies still dealing with the trauma and the mistrust. And of course, it all led to international war crimes trials for leaders like Milosevic, who actually died in his cell before a final verdict was ever reached.
And all of this really brings us to the biggest challenge left behind. The wars are over, right? The new maps are drawn, but real reconciliation, that's a task for generations. Which leaves us with a huge and vital question to think about. After so much violence, so much division, what does it actually take to rebuild a peace that will last?